Oh. And is here. And her mother that she was in home for the end of her life. And the nurses are caregivers, the medical news, and she said, she was always happy to do what she did. So if I get like this, it will be.
Yes. So we go from the moods to swing. So we went up on, we went Thursday. What did Jim stay? We stayed. Sure. And that was so we went on Thursday. So around 3 o'clock, we went to see her, and she wonders the whole day.
No, that she won't stay there.
So they're like, oh, we'll go get you. And she didn't want to come. And she came in the room. So we went back. So we went back after dinner. And she was praying. Very much calm. There are moments, seconds where you think there's a film she recognizes. Because at something yesterday, I don't know. So we were
Oh, I see. That's it. Oh,
Well, I think we should all kind of sit together for the Zoom, so it's like they're beautiful. Yeah, it's gonna be if you want to be seen on the Zoom, better in the center, maybe center, or if you're on the side, come to an aisle. The center. Okay, so we'll do this.
yeah.
Well, see, there's we need to be here so Zoom can take us up. Hello. I'm Bruce Miller. No, I didn't work with Ryan with this.
No, I didn't.
Good to meet you. Thank you for everything.
How about Mother's Day?
First was John, here's that I was talking to once. They were out to graduate. What was their graduation? Or is that something else? Yeah. They are your stuff?
Yeah, so my one. So one.
Yeah. Yeah,
Built out space.
because one of them was that one of them was a really good student, the other was not.
One of the, I rephrase it as one of them is made for the American. One of them struggles.
I gave it just to tolerate.
Our system is not sound.
First, see Sally all the way on the top.
School, you know,
That would be great.
hard on a lot.
Are you Brian?
Right, yes.
Hi, Brian, I'm Sandra. Thanks for all your help.
Well, next
Yes. Oh, yeah. Was she not sure? I think. David's there. Look at all the, where's Ellen?
I'm like, well,
So see the couple on the top row, Gary and Susan, and they tell you that they got married.
house,
Yeah.
where,
Right there.
there it is.
So the what's his name, Holloway?
Holloway.
Is that where we refer to?
No, an H-I-L-E, who looks in pretty good shape, is in Tucson. Yes. It looks like he has some Southwestern stuff in the back.
Welcome, friends, here, and welcome, friends on Zoom. Here I am, now you can see me. I'm Hillary, Gary's cousin. And we're just so grateful you're all here to remember our kind, sweet, warm-hearted, gentle-spirited, sprightly, and funny cousin, friend, Gary Mark Laden. As all of you know, relationships were everything. Everything. All of you sustained him. I think that he was completely nourished by all the relationships in his life, that it was the relationship that enriched it and gave it so much meaning. Personally, I used to love watching and engaging with all of you because this man of relatively short stature would automatically become bigger. His eyes would sparkle, this fiery, almost, starburst of mischievous joy as he regaled in your stories and your presence and the wine. Sometimes free and always affordably priced. Gary loved all of you so much. His friends were his family, and his family meant everything. Sometimes I think it was like the gilded structure from which everything hung. Sorry. The thing is, he loved his family so much, and even when it was difficult, even when it was hard, He was so loyal to the people he loved. It never stopped his belief that people could be their better, if not best selves. That was Gary Laden. He was fueled on humanity. It was always his greatest quality, and he always brought it into the room with an aura. You could feel it, if not see it. So today, as you all know, this is in Quaker tradition. Anybody who feels moved to speak, please rise and share your stories of our remarkable friend and cousin, Gary. When you're finished, sit down, and then someone else can stand up as well. Please, you folks on Zoom, we want to hear from you. Hi, Zoomers. So if you have anything that you would like to say about Gary, simply unmute your mute button, and we'd really love to hear your stories. And with that, I turn it over to you, friends.
So, I'm John Holt from the son. I'm Gary's cousin. Where is the mic?
It's on top of me.
My,
Oh, yes, everyone needs to speak loudly, please.
Sorry.
Where should you say?
Yeah.
what's the, okay. My wife suggested that I go to Target last night and buy a cardigan for Gary. Not you. But Gary was great. I remember growing up and being amazed at some dinner, probably Passover or something, when I learned he was like a wine taster. It's amazing. 7 years old or 8 years old at the time. But my wife and I have 2 boys, and Gary was always interested in them. Always wanted to hear about them. Always, wanted to know what they were doing and what what they were experiencing. And it was just great knowing him and his love for his family and for all his friends.
I'm just thinking, maybe we should stand where Hillary's good.
No, that chair is good, where you are.
Okay.
But speak loudly.
Take
Okay,
your mask off.
but someone just said better to stand from the side of the room.
Oh, really?
I can, sure, do that, sure.
Yes, I move on.
I thought,
Hello.
hello. I thought when you were speaking, it was perfect because you could see others and people could see you on the screen as well. Yes.
Ask them to wave if they can hear you.
Can you all hear us on Zoom? If you can, maybe just wave, that would be great.
Much better now. Yes, we can hear you.
Great. We are Tom and Ann Geary. I hope you'll forgive us for, we took a few notes before we did this. Gary and I met in the fall of 1969, his first year law students at George Washington. We were all in the same classes together that year, being alphabetically grouped by our last names. And in that grueling and sometimes terrifying year, Gary's intelligence and his determination served him well and really made him a standout that first year. Having survived law school, we both began our legal careers at the Federal Trade Commission, where we really formed a lifelong bond. Gary's commitment to the fair treatment of consumers was a beacon for others and a hallmark of his long and successful legal career. Our legal careers then diverged. But because of Gary, our friendship never waned. Gary was a loyal friend and simply a joy to be with, as Hillary has already said. Ann and I enjoyed many happy times with Gary at neighborhood restaurants when he was living on Corcoran Street. And it was particularly fun to go with him to one restaurant by the name of Floriana, where he was well known by everybody and much loved by everybody in the restaurant staff. They would show him to his table. And everybody in the restaurant knew him.
When we think of Gary, which we do often, we remember the happy times. We remember his unabated joy, surrounding himself with friends at his wine tastings or his famous 4th of July parties, the ones that he hosted. We remember his loyalty to his ancient car, Rhoda Toyota, even when she was a rusting hulk in the back of his house. Remember his color blindness and his quirky fondness for orange and brown sweaters, and his Don Quixote-like idealism, always in search of the next wrong to right and the next windmill to tilt at. Remember his infectious enthusiasm for every new experience and his delightful affection for others. Our friendship endured through Gary's battle with Parkinson's, which we got to see firsthand, and when we saw his warmth and light continuing to shine through despite the terrible disorder and the suffering it caused. With his passing, we feel an immense loss. We will miss it greatly.
Hello, my name is Ada Strasberg. My children went to Friends School in Baltimore, so I am familiar with the tenets of Quakerism and how they conduct themselves. Beside this unique form, they do not vote, but miraculously operate by consensus. And different from other religions, they truly believe there is a divine spark in everyone. On all these points, being here is most appropriate to pay tribute and memorialize Gary Laden. My late husband, also a Gary, and our Gary were law students together at GW 1969 to 1972. We met him in the first year of law school, and when he would later meet friends of ours, he would say, "I'm Ada's good investment." Let me explain. We sent out the invitations in June for our wedding to take place just before the beginning of their second year, thus knowing him only a few months. When he RSVP'd, he said, "Of course I will be delighted to come, but I'm surprised that I'm invited after only knowing you such a short time." My response was, "I am making an investment because though our friendship is very new, I believe we will know you for a long time into the future and want you to have shared our special day." The investment definitely paid off. Many of you knew Gary even longer than we did, but that is understandable since he always collected friends and kept them. I am grateful our friendship lasted more than 50 years. He was what Jewish people call a mensch, a person of integrity and honor, but also a special someone. Gary's birthday was November 20th, and he would come for his birthday dinner, but he always came with something for said children when they were little, i.e. a chocolate turkey. Most guys, especially young single ones, would not do that. He also came to both their weddings, one in New Orleans. He was a family member. But one could not eulogize Gary without mentioning his legal ability, which was also great. It included his gifts to the health and safety of the people of this country, his work to get our food labeled, and the lemon law and other consumer issues. He was a trailblazer. We also shared a love of food and travel and went to Calgary, Canada, and Lake Louise. Politics and news were also commonalities. So whether we vote, and he would want all of us to do that next month, or it is by consensus, we all love Gary and will always miss him. I tried to keep this short so many can share their thoughts, stories, and respects. Gary, thank you for your friendship.
Gary's longtime friend, Janice Weber, cannot be with us today, but she sent me a statement, and I'm going to read it. And I'm going to read it for her. I'm sorry I cannot be with you all today. Remember Gary and his family. Gary and I were friends for almost 55 years, a lifetime. I felt closer to him than either of my brothers. In fact, we were so close that we bought a house together. His mom thought we were like Queen Noor and King Hussein, all woman, short man. My foreign service career initiated Gary's love of travel. He visited me almost everywhere where I was posted. I will provide you with glimpse of a few of the adventures that Gary might have related. In Colombia, friends made a special dinner for me and my guests, which unbeknownst to me, included the country's most famous export. The food was delicious and all of us got so stoned that I could not drive. It was the first time for all of us, really funny to look back at night. In Cairo, Gary and friends were going off to Egypt, though I had to work. I was waiting in my car along the Nile to drive them to the airport, which seemed like a very long time. I finally went back in the building to see what had become of them and who had taken the elevator, a cave-like contraption that resembled something of an Agatha Christie novel. Needless to say, I discovered my guests caught between floors, screaming at the top of their lungs. Of course, knowing Gary, we finally got out. He left hours ahead of time to arrive at the airport and then make the flight in plenty of time. Gary and I saw many beautiful places together over the years, ate wonderful meals, spent fun nights at theater and concerts. We had a good long run. I was with him in his last moments, assuring him that he could leave and finally be at peace, and that I, his family, and all of his friends would keep him in our hearts forever.
I first met Gary when I was working at the Federal Trade Commission when we were in our 20s, so it's been a few years. And Gary and I became much more than work colleagues. We became really good friends. We traveled to Europe together for weeks. We go out to dinner together. We go to various entertainment things. And Gary had such a zest for life and was so excited about trying new things. And just want to tell one little story that I love about Gary that I do talk about repeatedly, which is he always liked to try interesting food. We had gone to a Szechuan restaurant together, and we had ordered Szechuan green beans. And we're sitting there and we're eating, and he's going, "Oh my God, these green beans are so hot, I can't bear it." He's drinking water, he's going crazy, and I'm sitting there eating the same thing. And it's then that I noticed that I have all the hot red peppers inside my plate. Step right into the huge green when we look back at him, what a wonderful, warm, delightful, adventuresome, loving person he was, who we all
Hi, this is Gene Holloway. Gary and I met after I spent 9 years in uniform. So Gary was my first civilian to get to know well. I found him delightful, like the rest of you, I'm sure, because he had a great personality. And he had lots of great experiences to show me. He had lots of friends and special friends. One day I heard a knock at our door and opened up, and there was a man with a big box of, I thought it was freezer. And the man gave me the books, and he says, I'm here from Gary's mother. And I taught her, he said, "I'm here with Gary's mother, and give these to Gary." And I said, "Oh, thank you very much." I got in a room, and Gary said, "What's that?" I said, "It was a package for you." And he took the package and looked at it, and he said, "Oh, that was Senator Williams. Harrison Williams. And I said, what was he doing bringing food to you? And he said, my mother makes these frozen dinners and maybe about a month's worth. And that's that's what he brought. She was talking to me. She said it was coming. She said, I know somebody who goes to Washington. I'll sit it down with him. And Gary had a great group of friends, and I learned a lot about civilians with him. He also liked my family. We had our first child while I was in law school, and he used to come over to our house, which I don't know, was about 45 minutes away. We lived in Gaithersburg while I was at practicing law there in Washington, and he used to come over and play with the kids. And it was a special trip for him because it wasn't in Washington. It was like far away then. These days, it's far away only because there's so much traffic. Anyway, I enjoyed him. He taught me a lot of things, like what it's like to be colorblind. I'd never seen anybody that's colorblind before. And I found that fascinating. He had a great career. He was a great civil servant. He got a lot of awards. And in law school, he was with a group that got the nutrition information placed on the back of food in the United States. So he was very active and just an all-around good guy. That's it.
Hi, can you hear me in the audience? Can you raise your hand if you hear?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Hi, my name is John Nowick. I'm a friend of Gary's for more than 45 years. We met when we both lived in Foggy Bottom through a friend named Miles Lambert and stayed in touch ever since. I have a short anecdote, which I think underscores some things others have said and reveals to me how Gary was such a lover of travel, food, and most importantly, friends. I'm currently no longer a meat eater, but back when I met Gary in the 70s and in the 80s, I loved to eat sausages, and Gary knew that. And it so happened I was posted to Vienna, Austria in the early 1980s. And I invited a lot of my friends to come visit because I was kind of alone out there. But one of the few friends who actually came and visit, of course, was Gary. He wouldn't miss up such an opportunity. So Gary flew over to Vienna, Austria, and he happened to know that Vienna, Austria has loads of sausages, but as I told him, it does not have good Italian sausages. So Gary went before flying out, and you could do this back in these days before current travel restrictions. He went to our favorite Italian deli in Southeast DC, bought several pounds of their Italian sausages, packed them in ice, put them into his luggage, and carried them over the Atlantic to Vienna, Austria. He greeted me with a big box of Washington, DC Italian sausages, which I enjoyed for many weeks to come. While he was in Vienna, Gary also decided to treat his sweet tooth. As some of you mentioned, Gary was quite a chocolate lover. For better or worse, Vienna, Austria happens to be a haven for chocolate, including the famous Sacher Torte. The Sacher Torte is made at the Sacher Hotel, but it's also made at many other pastry shops around Vienna. Gary went on a binge of touring every possible pastry shop and the Sacher Hotel in Vienna to make sure he could find the best Sacher Torte in Vienna. I think it took Vienna many months to recover from Gary's visit, but I certainly enjoyed it. He brought a lot of light to my life. Gary, I love you. I'm still with you, and I look forward to joining you someday. Thank you.
Well, I'm Sandy Mitchell. I need to go next because this that I'm going to read by Miles Lambert goes with what was just said in some ways. It's called Upper Crust, a remembrance of Gary Laden by Miles Lambert, who couldn't be here in person with us today. There's no end to what can bring back the memory of a lost friend. That's what I concluded yesterday after my visit to Whole Foods. The store is 20 miles down the highway, and I only get to it if I have some other business down that way. They have a wider array of breads than any other place in my usual travel radius. And after surveying them and deciding on one, I thought back to my recently deceased friend, Gary. Really, how could I not? One memory gave me a chuckle. The Mangialardo sausage caper. Mangialardo's was an old-time Italian store down Pennsylvania Avenue in DC. The fennel sausage was the best. I brought half a dozen links, froze them, and then crossed the National Mall at lunchtime to deliver them to Gary, who was waiting me on a corner near his office. The next day, as you know, Gary was flying to Vienna to our mutual CIA friend who knew and appreciated the skill that went into those sausages. The whole affair felt almost like clandestine ops. Well, that occurred during phase 2 of my friendship with Gary. Phase 1 went back to college in Long Island a half century ago. I have difficulty remembering how the relationship developed. We took courses with several of the same profs and lived in the same wing of the dormitory, but we never associated off campus until after I graduated, and I rode a Greyhound once from Manhattan to his parents' home in New Jersey. Gary was one of only several people who corresponded with me while I was away with the Navy in the Pacific Ocean in the early 70s. I think of that now because of his obituary in the Washington Post, which told of his heartfelt attachment to his many friends. Quote, exceptionally kind and caring, unquote. I can't add much to that, except to note that my daughter took to Gary right away, climbed onto his lap the first time he came to our apartment. You can't beat dogs and little kids for intuition about people. Gary had become a lawyer with the federal government in DC. And after I returned there, after the Navy, we would get together for a restaurant outing several times a year. Although on my trip to New Jersey, his mom led me to their densely packed fridge to ponder supper, and I realized that she was a foodie. None of it seemed to have rubbed off on Gary. He was unconcerned about the choices. That was in his early years, we know. But then came phase 2 of our friendship, the wine years. That was when he and I and 2 or 3 others would gather monthly for a wine tasting, typically with wines from remote corners of wine. It brought out just waiting for a cue. On one occasion, he even grilled marinated lamb expertly on the balcony of his townhouse in DC. That was in the same period as the Mangialardo sausage cake. Anyway, so here I am with my loaf of crusty herb bread from Whole Foods. My thoughts flew to Gary at the store yesterday because our little wine group had gradually fallen into an implicit division of labor as regards the provisions of our tastings. I have no recollection of how it happened, but Gary became the supplier of bread. He would show up each time with 3 or 4 kinds, and the 4 or 5 of us would go through them all with our meal. One that he brought several times was a tree of life bread, a sort of oversized, unsalted French bread pretzel. It seems appropriate to mention it at this time of loss. I must add that Gary and I never agreed about the quality of the wines we tasted. I should have known better than to have included a displaced Jersey jurist in the tasting circle. keen nose for breads.
Gary was the sort of neighbor everyone wants to have. And he was desperate to have. Not only was he open hearted with loving care, but it was me. I was even kind enough to let neighbors borrow and only occasionally return kitchen, garden, teacher, household items to sell out our clothes at the very moment they became needed most. Have any one of you noticed that this is almost always the case? There are evil household utilities. He not only had what you didn't, he was even willing to lend it out. No generous heart would be that. Gary dear, just anyone like you. And we found you were one of a kind and will always be remembered. They broke the mold you were born, and the world was well good with your kind and useful deeds. Everyone needs a friend who's willing to jump in and help solve difficult problems. And one of the good advice and so many areas was truly remarkable. Here's to you, Gary. The world appreciates all that you gave to us. And is it better for remembering which I just said? And follow your instructions. Rest in peace, Gary. Rest in peace.
I'd like to follow up Susan's comments. You know, Gary since the late 70s or early 80s when he moved into the Teapot Circle House. And my first memory of Gary is that he led a wine tasting group whose purpose was to find quality wines under $5. That was the time that Gary discovered wines from Chile, wines from South Africa, wines from any place except Europe and the United States. These were not popular, but he had wine tastings, and they were very good. A unique characteristic of the neighborhood. I have one sort of schadenfreude that he helped with. I had an outing in the early 70s, and the Audi company had flaws, and they put the flaws in the manual and said, "Don't worry about these." Like my machine only got 200 miles. Got a quart of oil every 300 miles. It's supposed to be 5,000. And then later, people were accused of not knowing how to drive because they put their foot on the pedal and suddenly they ran into a garage and went the wrong way. Gary led the group that arrested the head of the Audi company in Houston. I thought he could come to the United States for a vacation. So that was my shot in Florida. Thanks. He always came over to our house when politics, local politics came up, because Susan was a major supporter and assistant to Mary Berry. So he would ask, who do you vote for? What do you think about this, etc. And in my case, in the end, my role was to go over and change his light bulbs.
I would like to say something. I'm Ellen Schaefer, and I met Gary in June 1973. I have a couple of memories. There's so many, but one that I remember when he was moving from apartment on F Street, I think it was. He was moving to Corcoran Street. And I was working at the Organization of American States. They had just opened, they were opening a new building. And they had a lot of boxes in a driveway as they were unpacking. And so I said to Gary, "Are you packing? You're moving next week." And he said, "Oh, yes, he's packing." I said, "How many boxes have you packed?" He said, "About 3. And I said, "How many boxes do you have in the apartment so that you can get ready?" And he said, "I think I have about 2 more." And I said, "I will meet you tomorrow morning at 7:30, and we are going to go pick up boxes from the driveway at the OAS." And we must have picked up about 30 more Latin boxes. And that weekend, I went to help him pack. And he did the bedroom, and I was in the kitchen. And I noticed that he had can after can of soup. And the soup, as I reached to the back to try to get it all, they were 5 cents a can. A long time. And I said, "You're not allowed to buy any more soup. You know, you used up the more recent ones at least." So, but we had a good time. One of the Gary Laden, it was either 7 or 8. I don't remember how many people bought Toyotas with Gary. And as we were trying to decide where to go to buy a fleet of Toyotas, I went with him to a car dealership, and he was uncharacteristically, because I had never seen this side of him, he was rude. He was combative to the salesman. And then we walked out. I said, "You didn't give him a chance to say anything." And he said, "I know what they're like, these car salesmen." And he was not an inch. The other thing I remember is my first car, not the Toyota, but it was unfortunately short-lived. It was a horrible green. And Gary, who was colorblind, thought it was a shade of beige. So over time, I lived in various countries with Sydney, and Gary would always say, "Where are we going to travel? Where am I traveling next?" And he would come visit. And now that we're back in Washington, I miss him a lot. So,
Hi, can I say a few words? I'm Janet. Hi, I'm Janet Goldstein Dubner, and I met Gary when we were about 15 years old through the United Synagogue Youth, the conservative movement's youth group. And I'm pretty sure Bruce Goss introduced us, because Bruce and I went to Tween Teen Camp together. And Bruce has, remained Gary's good friend forever. And for a long time, he was our connection, keeping us both apprised of how Gary was doing. But we became fast friends. I went to his Rutgers Prep prom and then his Adelphi prom. And I went back and forth to DC periodically. I lived in Philadelphia for 7 years before and got married when I was in Philadelphia. But we kept in touch through all those years. And I had a couple of favorite stories about Gary. And one of them goes back to the law school group that did the consumer product nutrition information. Because I remember Gary telling me about Hellman's mayonnaise and their little tagline of, "What's Hellman's real mayonnaise made of?" And now I can't pass Hellman's mayonnaise without thinking of Gary. And I know every time I look at product information, nutritional information, that he and his group, and wasn't it Professor Bonzoff? Was that the name? those of you who went to law school with him, what an impact that has had on all of us and on my kids. And I just, it was just, you know, he was a wonderful guy, and he impacted every one of us and so many more people. And we saw him last, shortly after he'd moved into the assisted living facility. And we went down to the dining room with him and had dinner with him. And his companion at dinner was a retired judge, a lovely woman. And I thought, this was good for Gary, but it was difficult to watch, you know, our vibrant friend who just did so much be so disabled towards the end. So I think about happy memories, and as with the rest of you, we'll always miss him. So thanks for letting me speak.
My name is Chris White, and I worked with Gary at the FTC not quite 50 years ago. And there's some threads that I've heard that really strike home, some perhaps odd ones, but all the stories about automobiles, the Audi and the rusty Toyota. Gary learned an immense amount about consumer products. We were all working together on the implementation of the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. And we had an awful lot of work to do in a very short time. And there was quite a lot of pressure to get it done, and quite a lot of pressure to get it done in a way that didn't discommode the manufacturers overly much. And we didn't do that. We definitely tried our best to make that statute work for consumers. Dale Berkey was also one of the original warranty warriors, and we worked extremely hard. And I can still remember, notwithstanding all of the pressure, there was Gary with a sense of humor and a commitment to getting it done and getting it done well. I'd like to think that his lifelong commitment to consumer protection was formed at the FTC, but that's not true. It was formed at law school in conjunction with Professor Van Zyl. But I'd say we nurtured it a bit and helped him develop. He was a wonderful colleague, and I know all of those who worked with him at the FTC respected his entire legal career, and we miss him. Thank you.
Friends on Zoom and friends here. My name is Khalil Gerard, and I was lucky to meet Gary in January 1978. I had just joined the Federal Trade Commission in maybe November 1977, and I decided to join the Bureau of Competition. And my first assignment in the Bureau of Competition was to investigate whether there was a conspiracy to suppress the development of a male pill. Well, this really wasn't very interesting to me. I wasn't certain how I was going to investigate it. And in the Bureau of Consumer Protection, the former Advertising Practices Division had been split into 3 different divisions: ad practices, energy and product information, and food and drug, food and drug division. And Gary was the deputy for Linda Dorian in the energy and product division. And I became, in January 2 months after joining the FTC, the deputy in advertising practices. And I had no real knowledge of the FTC. I worked in a public interest law firm for about 5 years. And Gary, I just want you to know how helpful you were to me explaining the back channels, the logistics, personnel issues, and I can see you tunneling down the 7th floor at the Star Building, which is where the 3 advertising divisions were, and saying, hello, don't worry if some attorney tells you he doesn't want you to review his papers or his letters, things will work out. So Gary, I'm forever indebted to you for helping me in those first very difficult months. Even though we were in different divisions, you were facing some of the same problems that I was facing, and I was able to turn to you because you had already been at the FTC for a couple of years. So I want to thank you, Gary, for helping me in that initial period.
Hi, everybody. I'll continue the FTC chain. My name is Bob Doyle, and I'll talk about Gary as my boss, a little different angle. I had a wonderful federal career. How could people not like doing good work that helps people, working with good people? But I had a lot of great bosses as well. One is here, over here, and then one certainly was Gary Laden. In 1979, I interviewed with Gary as my first professional job at the FTC as a novelist. He interviewed with me. I'm nervous, but he put me at ease. Had a good conversation. The interview went well. Apparently, I got the job. And I worked with Gary until I left the commission. I went to law school later, and then left the commission, went to EPA, but never forgot Gary Laden. He would be island of calm, I thought sometimes. I was in some cases working with attorneys, some strong-willed attorneys. Maybe that's a redundant word. But they would be all sorts of things going on, and Gary could get things back to the calm level and work things out. I learned some great lessons that I learned from him. Finally, I want to say 2 things. I guess I lost touch with Gary though after which I feel bad about, but many of us can say that about people, I suppose. It makes me feel terrific to hear all the folks today who kept with Gary all these years until his last stage. I think that's a wonderful thing. And I guess the last thing I want to say is, yes, I do have one paid gig since retirement. It's playing Santa Claus. And which might explain, it didn't look like this at the FTC.
This is from Gary's friend Ronnie Berkowitz. She titled it "That Warmth and Generous Spirit." Back up so you guys on Zoom can see me. I've known Gary since he was a teenager. He and my brother Bruce met through USY and formed a close friendship that lasted until Gary's death. My husband Ron and I lived in Silver Spring when Gary moved to Washington to attend GW Law School, and that's when we too became Gary's close friends. I often felt I was vicariously getting a law degree with a specialty in consumer law because he shared his enthusiasm for his courses and his favorite consumer protection law professor. Gary shared many milestones and holidays with us. When we moved to Columbia, he continued to be part of family events, seders and high holy days, b'nai mitzvahs, and other special occasions. Ron and I enjoyed going to the Theater J and other theater events in DC with him, and we are so pleased to have been included in his parties and gatherings with family and friends. He loved to tell us about his travels and often brought us souvenirs. I used a little vase he brought back from New Mexico on our holiday table last month as a memorial to him. Whenever we visited one of the places he'd already been, He made sure to give us plenty of information about restaurants, museums, and other tourist sites. I can still remember going to the souffle restaurant in Paris he recommended. Most of all, what I remember about Gary is his humility. My brother and I came from much less privileged circumstances, but he never made Bruce feel less than in their relationship. His warmth toward my parents was so genuine and respectful. And when he was writing speeches for Esther Peterson, who was a consumer affairs advisor to Jimmy Carter, he did so quietly and with no fanfare. There were other examples of how his accomplishments and expertise were respected in many professional circles, but what we heard about his work was how much he loved what he was doing. Gary generously shared his circle of friends and cousins who are also his friends with us. We will miss that warmth and generous spirit. May his memory be a blessing.
So this is from Ronnie Berkowitz's brother, Bruce Scott. And it's titled, My Friend Gary Lee. One of my first memories of Gary was when we were in high school, and Larry Ballin and I wanted to go down the shore, as we called it in New Jersey, on a very hot summer afternoon. We assumed that Gary would join us, and so we drove over to his house to pick him up. When we arrived and told him what we had planned, Gary greeted us with the response, "Why would I want to do that when I can stay here in air-conditioned comfort?" He did not join us. He said something like, "Go have a good time, give me a call when you get there." Little did I know at the time that this would characterize an aspect of his personality for the rest of his life. Gary did what he was comfortable with and didn't yield to external pressure. However, while always steadfast in his convictions, he didn't judge others for doing things differently. An example of this was how Gary was never a slave to fashion and used to boast about how, as a teenager, he was small, so he could find clothes in the boys' section of Saks Fifth Avenue. He reminded us about how much cheaper they were than similar items from the men's department. This from someone whose mother would schlep Gary and a few friends to New York City for dinner at restaurants like the Four Seasons and treat us to front orchestra seats for the latest Broadway hit. As he got older, Gary continued to live life on his own terms, but did so with grace. Continuing to be practical about his clothing, Gary would wear just about anything as long as it was a cotton polo shirt and jeans or khakis in summer, or a turtleneck long sleeve shirt with a sweater and corduroy pants when it got colder outside. And by the way, that was how he was in a t-shirt that was yellowy gold and brown corduroy. As Bruce went on, as for colors, Gary wasn't fussy, as long as what he wore was a shade of beige or brown. And who can forget Betsy, Gary's beloved Buick? Another car. Betsy had a special place in his heart and in a parking space behind his townhouse. Once the Metro in DC was built, Betsy Buick and her successor became artifacts of Gary's past, reserved for short journeys to family and friends in Virginia and Maryland, as far away as Howard County. Many of us had wished that someday Gary would find his soulmate, but instead, in his own way, Gary had multiple soulmates, friends from childhood and adolescence, college and law school friends, colleagues, and many friends he met along the way. He was generous, spirited, and thoughtful, and evoked affection and love in all those he knew. And he excelled at maintaining those relationships. Did I mention cousins? Family was always very important to him, and he seemed to find a new cousin wherever he went, locally and in faraway places. He loved to travel, and when he did, He often visited friends and families all over the country and in many parts of the world. When he traveled, wherever he went, he carried all of us in his heart. My wife Julie and I have the souvenir tchotchkes to prove it. He was a wonderful consultant when it came to traveling to an unknown place. Excuse me. And I am sure that he was a wonderful elder hostel guide in DC. He also excelled at finding wonderful, affordable wines and the best chocolate and ice cream, of course. In the last few years of his life, it was Gary's cousins and local friends who made sure that Gary was comfortable and not alone. I will be eternally grateful to those folks. This is Gary's legacy. Each of us is just a little bit better for having known Gary. And in this way, Gary's memory will always be a blessing. L'adore, l'adore.
I'm another Bruce, I'm Bruce Cohen. But I want to comment on something that Bruce said and his, which was about Gary's stubbornness. It's always exercise respect. And you would make a suggestion to Gary, and he would almost always say, join me. I'll think about it. Gary said, he often did, I'll think about it. Get ready. No, thank you. I really appreciated hearing your personal stories. It's very hard. I'm going to go a different tack. In the mid-1980s, I had the sad honor on a number of occasions to speak at memorial services for friends who died of HIV/AIDS. And in each of those times that I spoke, I had a certain passage from the Bible that I always read from. Many of you who are my age will recognize the lyric. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to rend and a time to sow. A time to keep silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Now, Gary was a Jewish person, and this being Memorial Service, I think it's appropriate to recite the Mourner's Cottage. For those of you who know it, please join in with it. Yitgadal v'yitgadal, today Rado. V'yamodi v'rachir say, v'yamlich of the say. Hayet homi kibet hayet homi Yisrael. Hagalatus read Roman. Yehesh may Rabak worker, Leolam man Maya. Yitbarak, Yishtabak, Yitbarar, Yitman, Yitnase. Yithadar, Yithalek, Yithalal, Snake, Yishab, Kuriku. They all want me called Rifasa, Tushbasa, Naming, excuse me, Beimru, Amen. Yeheshlam, Rabba, Shemaya, Ayim, Legacy, all Israel, Beimru, Amen. Oseh Shalom, Bibra, Luya, say Shalom, Aleim, all Israel, Beimru, Amen. Please be seated. Got to wrap it up.
Please.
No, but please do. Very short comments. I'm Bill Haynes, and I worked with Gary when he was at the Federal Trade Commission. He was my boss and a friend, and I think you know his qualities from what people have said. But before we wrap this up, I want to say that his cousins, Sandy and Hillary, did an unbelievable job taking care of him in his decline. When he was still competent, I I said to him, Gary, you have a fantastic family. And he smiled broadly and said, yes, I do. And without Hillary, Sandy, their families, his life would have not been as good as it was until he died. Thank you.
In conclusion, last month I had the pleasure of seeing the performance of Leonard Bernstein's seminal piece, Mass at the Kennedy Center. I first saw it 51 years ago when it opened up the Kennedy Center. And it's about the story of coming together. And at the end, there's a sense of hope, a sense of renaissance, a sense of recovery. And at the very end, there's a Deus Ex Machina, a voice from above, that says very simply, the Mass is over. Go in peace. Ladies and gentlemen, go in peace. Please join us downstairs for Gary's favorites, some salmon, some chocolate, some wine. As it said, Gary Laden, may his memory be a blessing.
I wonder, can I say something before everybody leaves?
Yes, please.
My name's Ellen Jablon, and it was very hard to hear what people were saying, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating anything. But I first met Gary when, probably nobody mentioned this. I first met Gary at, he joined the DC JCC softball league. And he had no ability at sports whatsoever. And I taught him, I took him on the side and taught him how to throw a softball and how to swing a bat. And he would always tell everybody after that how we met, that I taught him how to play softball. And after that, we would meet all the time for dinner and to go to movies and theater, as he loved those. And so we had a good time. And one time I traveled with him. He told me about the American Jewish Congress, and we went to Europe, and it was a bus trip. And I felt like if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. Every day we were going to a different city, but it was a lot of fun with Gary. So I just wanted to mention that he was willing to try anything.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your remembrances.
Just so you all know, if your friends could not make it, the session has been recorded and will be available in a day or two on YouTube, and we will get the code out.
Thank you, everyone on Zoom, for being here. Bye.
Bye.
It was fun to see a lot of Gary's friends that I knew.
It was good for us to see you too.
Can some of us stay on on Zoom?
Yes.
I would love to do that. Thank you. I wanted to add a memory. I met Gary in 1973 through Ellen Schaefer. Ellen, you want to give a wave? There. I was a psychology graduate student at GW, and remember Gary's incredible enthusiasm working for the FTC and everything he was doing. I thought the commissioner was Elizabeth. I can't think of her last name. Do you remember what was her last name?
Dole.
What?
Dole. It was
Dole.
Elizabeth Dole. Okay. He was just crazy about her, and they worked very closely together. And I have a little different or an additional memory of Gary. He and I used to play tennis. We were a foursome. One of the people was Kathy Sulzberger, who was Arthur Sulzberger's daughter. And it was an indoor tennis court. It had a bubble. And I don't remember exactly where it was located, but Gary was a terrible athlete. Nevertheless, one summer I challenged him to play tennis and I wanted to make sure that I would win. And what I did was Gary had trouble with the heat, as somebody mentioned. I challenged him on a day, it must have been 100 degrees. And frankly, I cannot remember who won the tennis match, but he wouldn't back down and he took me up on it and we played tennis. Another memory is I remember Betsy Buick. And I don't know if others remember, but Betsy Buick smelled of oranges or tangerines. Do people remember that? You don't, Ada. I remember you're nodding your head. But it always smelled of tangerines, and he loved that car. But another funny memory I had is I had a red Mercury Montego. And the thing was like, we used to call it the boat mobile. It was enormous. Every time I pulled into a gas station, one of the attendants wanted to buy it. So you got the picture. At one point, the car could only make right turns. Gary was kind enough to save a spot for me. So somehow I could get the car in, only making a right turn. I lived in Chicago I left DC in 1976, and we kept in touch for a while. Mostly heard about him through our mutual friend Ellen, who I went to high school with. And I lived in Chicago, as I said, for 34 years, and now I'm in Newton, Mass. I've been here 12 years. So I really haven't been in touch with Gary, although I visited him once and we had lunch somewhere in somewhere in DC in 2012. And he had started volunteering, nobody mentioned this, to give tours of Washington, DC. And I thought, oh my God, this is the perfect job or volunteer position for Gary, because he is just so friendly and outgoing and so enthusiastic. And that's my last visual memory. And I'm thankful for that, because I would have hated to see Gary in any deteriorated, compromised position, because he's a wonderful person. And even though it's been many years, I think of him fondly and miss him. So that's what I have to say.
First of all, it's so good to see. I don't know if you guys can hear me. If you
Yes.
can, yeah, okay, because I'm not getting the green box around me. Number one, it's so nice to see some of you going back 50 years. And I remember so many of you, and I feel bad that we were not able to hear the people at the meeting house. And I wanted to come so badly, but lots of problems. But anyway, it would have been so great for us to all get together downstairs and talk among ourselves, because there are so many stories that exemplify Gary, and I would have liked to have shared them with people. So if there's maybe somebody who's a techie down there who can maybe set up a place for us or a way for us to share some of our own stories with Gary with each other, that would be great. And I would be willing to coordinate it, but not the technical parts. Because I mean, I know it's like Sandra, you're the fish lady, right? Aren't you? You know, and Miles, are you the one who was the guy who was Greek and Gary brought a carpet home for him or something
Exactly.
like that?
I can't remember. I couldn't think of his name. Was it Mike?
Mike.
Name.
Mike was his
Mike.
first name. Mike.
Mike
Mike Empress.
Mike Empress.
Right.
That was it.
That was it.
You know, so there are so many people, I'm sure, who were not here, but it would be nice if they could kind of click in at some point. So again, nice seeing you all. And I'm not the wino. That was not the thing that Gary and I had in common, but toast and a cheers to Gary and all who loved him.
5 or 10 years, Nobody mentioned this phone that he had so many travel things.
I'm the Zoom tech. You can all boo me now for the audio. It's just, it is what it is. So I am sorry. Thank you for your feedback, though.
Well, now we can hear you. I couldn't hear the other people.
I know. It just depends where there's, because I'm standing right in front of the microphone.
So maybe they should have had people come up in front to talk.
Woulda, shoulda, coulda.
Right.
I would have.
But thank you for doing this, because it did bring all of us together.
Yes, thank you for doing it.
To say,
Woulda, coulda, shoulda, I would have, should have had 2 handheld microphones. That way, if somebody just cannot speak up, if somebody could run a microphone to them and they could talk like that, and that would be clear. But, well, anyway.
Well,
Who
thank
should
you.
we
Thank
write
you.
to maybe have a follow-up? It sounds like people have additional memories or just want to chat again. Is there a way to send out another Zoom link invitation to this group?
Bruce Cohen could do that. I'm going to be cleaning up the audio and posting it on YouTube. So at least some of the messages you can listen to again. But I'll mention that to Bruce, or I'm sure, do you know Bruce, who organized this?
No.
I think everybody knows of Bruce, but not everybody knows him.
I will mention that to him.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for attending and being patient.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I have to
Thank
go.
you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Ellen, I'm around all afternoon if you have time to call me.
I'll try.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye, Ellen.
Bye-bye.
Do people have other memories that they want to share of Gary?
I don't know how long we can be on, because you're all disappearing from my window. There are only 4 of us showing right now.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe people are leaving.
You know, but I remember you, Barbara, because you traveled with him and you lived out in California for a while.
No, never. That wasn't me.
Oh, maybe you went to Chicago. Janice is in California, and she went to the funeral, and I had hoped to meet her, but then she was in Washington like a week ago, and so she wasn't coming back. So anyway.
No,
but-
I was only in DC for 3 of the overlapping years, and I lived on New Hampshire Avenue at DuPont Circle. And
yeah, I remember you. I don't know if you remember me.
I know your name, but I don't, it's too many years and my memory
Right,
is.
and I know your name, and I your face didn't look familiar.
Well, I no longer look like I used to look. Right.
Okay, I didn't know all of you because met Gary later. I think it was the early 80s in DC, but I remember the names sound familiar, so I think he's mentioned all of your names.
But I appreciated your talking about his baseball playing, because he was a terrible athlete.
Yeah, he was a terrible.
And he looked so jerky. I mean, his movements were not graceful. I mean, he was very.
No, and as the years progressed with him, I noticed that he probably was with Parkinson's then, but didn't know it. He actually would walk very small steps. And he always did that. He'd walk very small steps, but very fast.
Yeah.
So then the speed slowed down. But you're right. He was always kind of jerky and just wasn't an athlete. And he knew that. He knew he wasn't an athlete.
But he's
cerebral and some are athletic, and he was the cerebral part of us.
Yes, right.
And
but
it was
I
wonderful. And I have to tell you, when I went to see him maybe a year or so before he died, and it was heartbreaking because he couldn't talk, you couldn't understand what he was saying. And Barbara, yes, I mean, I have to tell you, when my grandfather died, my mother didn't want to look in the coffin. And a friend of hers said, Kay, look, because then that'll be the last image you have. Whereas,
Terrible.
and she was eternally grateful to this woman who she didn't even like. But, and I did it for Gary. I went to see him for Gary, not
But
for me.
that's different. He was alive then.
Right.
That was very different. You did a mitzvah, Ada, by
Thank
seeing him at that point, because you did something very, very, very difficult to do. It was for him, not for you.
Right.
I actually went to see him, a friend and I, Steve and I, we all three of us would go to the movies together a lot. And we went to see him after, I don't know if it was after his fall when he broke his hip. And anyway, he was in a nursing home and we went to see him there. And he was downhill after that because he wasn't sure what he was saying. And he was kind of confused. Like, I knew him when he had his Parkinson's because my father had Parkinson's and we always talked about it. But then when he fell and broke his hip, he kind of went downhill from there and started
Somehow,
getting
a hip, people break their hip and it's.
I know, but for him, it was his dementia started then. You know, sometimes it's just a trauma that sets it off. And I guess breaking his hip set it off for him. And he started going down. And so we went to see him in the nursing home. I wasn't able to go, but Steve went to see him at his assisted living. And I called him at his assisted living, but he really couldn't speak very much. It was just, he had his dementia then.
Right.
So he had somebody staying with him, but he didn't know who it was and when it was. And, but he had a lot of people who helped him and
loved him.
Yeah.
Miles, say something, because you didn't say anything.
He might not be on anymore.
Yeah, he's still on. He's just muted.
Yeah, you have to unmute, Miles.
Unmute, Miles. Go all the way. Yeah. Go all the way to the side, and there's a mute button. Click it, and that'll unmute you.
Send it to him in the chat so he can read it.
I don't know if you can do that.
Go like this, Miles, if you can hear us. Give a thumbs up if you can hear us. Okay, there are 3 little dots in that little box. Click on the dots and see if there's an unmute there. Or if there's a mute button, and you can click on the mute button to unmute it.
There you go.
Oh, great. We hear you.
Well, I didn't say anything. I had sent
Sandy.
Weeks after Gary died, I wrote something about him. I write occasional little essays that I send to about 40 friends, and I wrote something about Gary, and Sandy was going to make copies of it available there at the
At the friend's place.
At the friend's place, yes. So I don't know if she did or not, but anyway, in that first of all, I'm the person who got the wine group together that Gary attended for, well, we had the whole thing for probably a dozen years. We would meet once a month. I would select a wine.